Hello my friends, it's the Game Boy Geek here, and today we find ourselves in Dracula's castle where you are one of 6 villains and you're damned to hunt or be hunted for all eternity as punishment for the pain that you've inflicted in life. Now each dusk you'll wake with no memory. You'll be searching for weapons, avoiding traps, maybe even becoming a vampire yourself. Will you survive the night? Damnation The Gothic game is a gothic horror battle royal game for 3 to 6 players with a 2-player variant. Takes 45 to 60 minutes to play, is for ages 14 and up, and published by Black Letter Games. Now it's on Kickstarter right now, so I'm going to show you how the game works, and I'll see you on the other side. This is a Kickstarter preview, so all the art and components you see here are not final, they're prototypes. You're going to want to check the link in the description of this video to see all the updated art and components. Each player is going to take control of one of these Victorian era inspired villains, and they'll be using these standees to move around Dracula's castle. And each of these villains will have a player board which will help them track their health, some special abilities, and souls that they'll claim. And as you can see, the abilities on these are different for each of the villains. And here's a close-up of the last 2. Here is the board, which is Dracula's castle. Everyone starts out from the gate, and they're going to be coming in, moving around, and going to different rooms, and each of the rooms do certain different things. You'll be drawing cards from these rooms, which will give you different strategies. And the game itself does go through 4 different phases, but in the end, you're just trying to be the last one standing, having everyone else be slain. Now during this first phase, the arrival, this is sort of like a jump start where players will all take 4 turns in a row back to back, and it kind of gets the game jump started. Now each player is going to be rolling a die, moving around, and there's certain rules in this phase that makes it, a little bit easier to sort of get started. Like you can't attack other players, you can't play cards unless it's your turn, certain rooms are locked at this point. It's really just the sort of the beginning of the game to get yourself and your standees in different spots. And when rolling and moving, you can add up to 3 to your roll. It's really just to get everyone to sort of get to different rooms, spread out a little bit. And once all players have taken those 4 turns, you'll go to the Nightfall, which is the main phase in the game. Now let's say when rolling, you're going to be moving, you cannot change sort of direction. And let's say you're able to get here and go into the Great Hall. This shows entryways to the different rooms. Now there's different types of rooms. The ones with this door icon are standard rooms, and then there's some special rooms. For example, for the standard room, the Great Hall. And so the rooms have different decks of cards depending on which room it is. In this case, we would draw a card from the Great Hall. Now there's different types of cards you may come across in the game. There might be event cards where you just do what it says, like the Fortune Teller, and all these cards have some flavor text on there as well. But this says, view the top card from 3 different rooms. And you do that, and then you put this at the bottom of the deck that it came from. Sometimes you'll have action cards that you'll be able to play on your turn, like gain an additional attack phase this turn, allowing you to attack more than once. We're going to go over attacking a little bit later. Some of them are weapons, like this one says, hey, when attacking you get to roll a d6 to determine this weapon's range or how far you can throw that. And you might have some protection cards. Now this card wasn't actually from the Great Hall, but I wanted to show you that there are types of cards that can help protect you, like the Black Knight's Armor, and it prevents the first 6 damage you suffer each turn. However, you will be slain if you enter the moat with this card because, hey, that armor's too heavy and you just sink. Now, starting with this main phase and later in the game, when you roll to move, you also have to roll the darkness die, and this can have different effects, like if it comes up with the castle, before moving, you have to immediately draw a top card from that castle deck. And this deck always has events in them, like in this case, it's a Dread Shadow, and you have to enter a room this turn if you are able, and as we'll see later, there's some rooms you won't want to go in. Or maybe you have the Candlelight, which allows you to add or remove 1 pip from your movement from what you rolled. Sometimes that die won't do anything, and sometimes you'll be stepping in traps in the darkness. Because normally when you move, if you end your movement on a trap, you have to flip it over and do what this trap says. Like in this case, it is a saw, and you take 5 damage. Ooh, if that hit you here, you'd go down from 10 to 5. And if you get down to 0, you're slain and you can't win. But there's some other creative things that happen too. We'll get to that later. Now, if you rolled this darkness die, any trap that you cross over, not just land on, you have to trigger as well. Now, normally, if you end your movement on one of these secret door spots, you can go to any other secret door. But some of the traps are secret doors as well, so sometimes they're not always bad. And sometimes the trap can actually slay you immediately. Now these traps, after they're activated, they stay face up so everyone can see them, but they don't get removed. And some of these are trapdoors that put you right into the moat. And when you go into the moat, which generally the way to get there is through these traps, you're going to suffer 2 damage and miss the rest of your turn. And then on your next turn, instead of rolling, you must try to escape the moat. And keep in mind, that protection we had as the armor, you would have been slain if you had gone to the moat. And when you roll for your next turn, sometimes you'll be suffering damage, but you got to roll again. So you might get a lot of damage staying in the moat, otherwise you'll be going to different spots. Now, if when moving you land next to or adjacent to another player, you have 2 choices. One of them is you can declare to have power adjacency over them. And you get to control that player's movement on their next turn. They still roll, but you tell them which direction they must go in. And at least that player does not have to roll the darkness die that time. But instead of that, maybe you want to attack a player. This one says you have to be within a range of 1, which we are, and it's going to do 3 damage to this player. It's a vial of acid, and this says that protection cards can't be used to reduce or prevent damage dealt by this weapon. So let's talk about the different abilities. Now, everyone has a passive ability that's always available to you. Like when you gain power of adjacency over a player, you can take that player's soul token. Now, the soul token, we each start with one. Also, if you slay another player and you're the person that slayed them because of what you did, you'll get all the soul tokens that they had on their board. And these are good for a few different reasons, because as you activate some of these other ones, like, hey, re-roll any die you've rolled, or roll a d6 and add this to your movement for this turn, or when controlling a player's movement through power of adjacency, roll and add a d6 to their movement total. So you could, when you use these get flipped over, but you can spend one of these soul tokens to then refresh that ability. Another way to use those soul tokens is you can discard one, or you have to, in order to get into the Dark Tower. That allows you to take 2 cards from the Dark Tower deck and pick one to keep and put one at the bottom. These are really powerful. This is what the armor was from where I showed you earlier. But look at this weapon, the Sword of the Damned. Is players that are damaged by this are slain, which is crazy. And the Cloak of the Vampires, you can move any distance up to your movement total. So these are really powerful cards that you can use souls to get. Now, if a player is slain, they'll flip over their player board, and on their turn, they'll be taking one of these actions to haunt other players, like looking at the top 2 cards from any deck and returning each of those to the top or bottom in any order, or adding trap tokens face down, or players entering or passing the location where you were slain suffer 2 damage, so all different ways to mess with the other players. And when a player is slain, one of these death knell cards are flipped over. They're randomly assigned at the beginning of the game, and there's more cards than what are here, and they do different things that change the rules of the game. Like all weapons now deal 10 damage, or the next player to suffer 1 or more damage is slain. They have really powerful things. Also, as soon as the first player is slain, we go to the next phase of the game, which is the descent. And at the end of every player's turn, this is going to go down. And when it gets here or here, you're also going to reveal and activate one of those other death knell cards. And once it gets to the last phase, which is the fall, at the end of a player's turn, that player suffers or damage, and players cannot gain health. And also, any player that goes into the vault that's not the vampire is slain. And this is a great time to talk about this cool character, the vampire. This is a special room of the vault. Because if you go here and the vampire isn't in play, meaning he's still here, you're going to lose 3 health and you're going to become the vampire. That player will not only be using the vampire standee to move around, they'll also have a new board, and they'll set this to the 6. On the turn tracker, there's also a powerful vampire deck where they'll draw 3 cards from there that do different things, like double your movement totals, and you cannot bite a player this turn, which is one of the things you can do, because once you become the vampire, you're going to be choosing from these different actions, like biting. When moving, you can stop on and slay a character you pass. You can do other things, like after slaying another player, immediately take another turn. So the game completely changes for you when you're the vampire. Now, you get to roll 2 dice for movement, but you don't trigger traps, and you do not roll the darkness die, but you cannot use secret doors or enter rooms apart from the vault on your final turn here. But you're also immortal, which means you're immune from all damage cards and abilities unless otherwise stated. And when you do feed and slay someone, you get to add 2 to the turn tracker and draw another vampire card. Now, if another player is present in the vault, when you return there, that player is slain, and if you don't return to the vault on your final turn, you're slain. The last special room I want to talk about is the Great Spiral Staircase. Now, when you end your movement on an arrow, you automatically move where that arrow points you here. And you don't want to be on here, because if you get all the way to the bottom, you're slain. And every time you roll dice, you're going to be moving in this direction unless you roll a 6, which gets you to go in the opposite direction. So most of the time when you get to the Great Spiral Staircase, you're going to be dead. That's pretty much how you play Damnation the Gothic game. The last villain standing wins. Well, there you have Damnation the Gothic game, and as I showed in the overview, you're going to be trying to be the last villain standing using all sorts of different strategies. Now, if you'd like to see the final art and components and all the different pledge levels available, you can click the link below me in the description of this video. Now, that's going to take you directly to the Kickstarter project page, and I'm sure that Blackletter Games would love your support.